Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and all we are is dust in the wind.
Such an existential musing for such a non-existential film. In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we've been covering the films of 2003, and we have reached the episode where we take a pick from our producer, David Rosen. So, Dave, what movie have you picked for us to talk about?
We are going to talk about Todd Phillips Old School.
Yes.
And Dave, let me jump in right there. Josh, how could you say this is not existential? Literally, the entire setup is a man going through an existential crisis.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I think the movie doesn't really delve into that much, but that's fair. Perhaps I am not giving Old School its proper respect on that front. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, Old School, a very popular movie, was a huge box office hit. It grossed $87 million on its budget of only $24 million, which I think is a lower budget than you would have now with a movie with these stars, especially Will Ferrell, who'd probably get paid $24 million just on his own or close to it. I don't know, maybe not Luke Wilson or Vince Vaughn so much. Certainly not Luke Wilson.
I don't think Will Ferrell would make $20 million now either. I think that Frat Pack brand of comedy has kind of gone by the wayside to the streamers.
Yeah, maybe so. I think Will Ferrell is still a huge star on his own, even if this brand of comedy is not the top of the pack or whatever. But I mean, he's just a superstar. So maybe not 24 million, but a lot. I think, he commands, even for a movie like his recent Netflix movie, the Eurovision Song Contest. I'm sure he was paid quite a bit. But this movie, and Todd Phillips too, I think probably commands a pretty big payday these days. But this movie made on a relatively small budget for something like that, and brought in huge money and just was a big pop culture phenomenon. It was the right moment for this, I guess. It worked out well. These stars were in the right positions, and this kind of comedy was really the popular style, I suppose, in 2003. And so it made a lot of money, and it was generally like a hit with audiences. It got a B+ cinema score, which is pretty good. Critics, not as much. It was, it was mixed. There was some positive. It wasn't all negative. But to start out, Roger Ebert hated this movie. He gave it 1 star out of 4, and he said, of course, also, Roger Ebert started this review with long musings about his own college days, as he is prone to do, but I skipped all that. So he said, the movie has been slapped together by director Todd Phillips, who careens from scene to scene without it occurring to him that humor benefits from characterization, context, and continuity. Otherwise, all you have is a lot of people acting goofy. The movie was screened before a, quote, invited audience in a Michigan Avenue theater, where 2 small groups of audience members laughed loudly at almost everything, and just about everybody else waited politely until it was over and they could leave. Critics are sometimes required to see comedies at such screenings because we can appreciate them better when we see them with a general audience. And to be sure, I learn a lot that way. So Ebert here expressing contempt not only for the movie, but also for the people who enjoyed the movie.
Josh, when you heard that, were you like, you're my boy, Blue?
Yes. I have certainly had that experience at screenings where the public is invited along with the press, and I'm surrounded by people who are laughing uproariously at some movie, and I'm just stone-faced. And I think, as Ebert says, I think that the idea there from the studios is to show the critics how funny a movie is, how positively an audience is reacting to it. But I feel like, at least for me, and it seems like maybe here for Ebert too, it has almost the opposite effect. As everyone is laughing and you're not, you're like, what is wrong with these people? This movie is terrible. And it turns you against it even more.
Wouldn't it be great if we were at a screening with the general public and, you're in the critic row because you're a critic, and Dave's in the critic row because he's a sham, and I'm in the critic row because you took me, and everyone's laughing, Josh. And then you got up and you're like, "Why are you laughing? Why are you laughing?"
I would not do that, of course. But I'm sure, Jason, I'm sure we have had that experience together where you've come along with me to something like this. And maybe even where we're in sync and you're not laughing either, but we're stuck around all these people who are laughing. So not an uncommon experience, and certainly, soured Ebert on this. But of course, I mean, comedy is one of these things that's extremely subjective. And as I always say as a critic, I can say, oh, I didn't find this movie funny, but I can't tell somebody, oh, you didn't laugh at this movie. Like, that's objectively something that they did do. So clearly there was an audience that was really into this movie and finding it hilarious. And some critics found it hilarious as well. And actually, before we get to that, going to sort of, Jason, your point about this movie actually being kind of existential, Manohla Dargis in the LA Times had that perspective a bit as well. She said, "Your enjoyment of the new comedy Old School may hinge on whether you find the sight of Will Ferrell running down a street in nothing more than black socks and shoes uproariously funny, inexplicably tragic, or a little of both. Old School more or less picks up where director Todd Phillips' last Lollapalooza road trip ended. The jokes are funnier in Old School and the comedy more evolved, mostly because the guys are feeling the pain of commitment. The disconnect between what men say and what they do makes Old School funnier than most of its gags, and it also invests the movie with curious pathos. As it pans out, Phillips never goes fully for broke, and even Will Ferrell, who gets the benefit of the film's more robust routines, fails to scale the lunatic heights of his Saturday Night Live glory." And I had completely forgotten about Road Trip, which I have seen and was Todd Phillips' previous film that's even worse than this one and even more sort of raunchy and lowbrow. But I guess this was a step up. So I don't know. Did you find pathos in this movie at all, Jason?
No, I don't agree that it was evolved comedy either, but there were things that made me laugh. So
right.
That's where I'm going with that. So.
I mean, maybe it's evolved from Road Trip, I guess. Have you seen Road Trip?
No, I actually never saw Road Trip or Euro Trip for that matter.
Did Todd Phillips also direct Euro Trip?
I don't think he did, but wasn't that a sequel of sorts to it?
It actually wasn't connected, but it just kind of capitalized on it, basically.
All right. Dave, did you see Road Trip?
Loved it.
Wow. Well, I can't wait for whatever year that came out, and we can have that as Dave's pick.
I would like that.
I would not. Wasn't that the big breakout movie for DJ Qualls? Was he?
I think so. Yeah.
Breckin Meyer, Amy Smart. I remember. I didn't see the movie, and I remember all three are in it. So.
Oh yeah, I did see it.
Tom Green, of course.
Right. Yeah, Tom Green got a shout out in one of these reviews, although I didn't pick it up. But people mentioned him. So. Finally, Mick LaSalle in the San Francisco Chronicle kind of had the opposite, where he liked the jokes more than the sort of overarching themes. He said, "The saving grace of Old School is that it has about a dozen funny moments. These moments aren't mildly funny or chuckle funny, but really funny, infused with the same coarse, go-for-broke sensibility that director Todd Phillips demonstrated in his first feature, Road Trip. There's nothing PG-13 about Phillips, who appears as himself in one scene uttering a single line, 'I'm here for the gangbang.' That says it all. The terrain, the audacity, and ultimately the limits of Old School, which despite the big laughs, barely holds together in between. The problem isn't only that its story is weak, it's tedious as well." I mean, and certainly one thing I noticed structurally with this story in this movie, we get to a point eventually where, these guys, these adult guys have started their own fraternity at the college, and the dean, played by Jeremy Piven, is trying to shut them down. And we finally get to the point where, as typical for these movies, they have to follow these convoluted rules and go through all these challenges to keep their charter intact. And which seems like it would be the centerpiece of the movie. And I remember pausing it at that point and thinking oh, there must be a bunch left. And it's 17 minutes before the end of the movie. So it's really poorly structured, this film.
I thought the exact same thing, Josh. And had they wanted to look at a structure done well with this, perhaps they could have looked back at Billy Madison, which also has an academic decathlon, probably a little earlier in the film and probably a little longer with its with its pacing and its, usage. And let's get to Billy Madison one of these days.
Yes.
I've never seen Billy Madison actually, so
Ooh.
that's an
But Josh,
experience.
let me bring up another point. They
Yes.
mentioned Todd Phillips' cameo in this thing. And I think we can both agree that Todd Phillips' hair not that dissimilar to Dave's hair. So, Dave, how do you announce yourself when you arrive at the gangbang?
Yeah.
However I need to, basically.
Yeah, that's good. Todd Phillips also has this like wispy mustache in this movie that makes him look really like a guy who's arriving for a gangbang. It's really the perfect look, whether that was his natural look or not. Yeah. So, Jason, did you like this movie? I mean, did you see it when it first came out, and did you enjoy it?
Yeah, maybe we saw it together, maybe we didn't.
Maybe.
Of course, I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theater, but I haven't seen it in so long, and definitely did not like it as much this time. Found things funny, but was very, very angry at how badly structured it was.
Wow. Angry. Yeah, it is very badly structured. And I think all of these articles or any of these reviews that talk about the deeper thematic elements or the pathos or any of that stuff, I think they're completely off the mark. I think that stuff is just like, if it's there, it's glossed over. It doesn't have any resonance or anything like that. And I did see this movie in the theater and reviewed it, and did not like it at all at the time, and also continue to not like it now. So, consistent in my response, I would say.
Well, just let me say, like, you do sometimes have movies that are not necessarily structured and feel episodic or sketch worthy. I think of Super Troopers, I think of Wet Hot American Summer, and you can get away with it if it's really, really funny. And I like both those movies, but this one, I think maybe the first time I laughed, like I said, and this time I was just like, come on, man. Like, you have to have a connecting scene or something like that. Or you can't just say like, no, in the next scene. And then your explanation of why it got to yes is just like, now they said yes, in the scene right after it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, and I think you're right that you might forgive a lot of that stuff if you're just consistently laughing through the whole movie. And I mean, for me, I certainly was not. Obviously, a lot of people are, and maybe Jason, you were a bit, but I think there's plenty of movies where you might look at it and say, "Oh, this movie is really, really funny," and it's just kind of haphazardly constructed, but who cares because it's just hilarious. And certainly, that's not how I felt about this movie.
Well, yeah, let me just give an example, Josh, of what we're
Okay.
talking about, right?
Yeah.
Craig Kilborn's talking.
Oh my God! Talk about like a weird blast from the past. Like, look at Craig Kilborn in this movie.
Yeah, right. He comes in as the boyfriend of Ellen Pompeo's character, Nicole.
Sure, whatever.
And Luke Wilson, who plays Mitch, has a crush on her, but they're boyfriend girlfriend. And then Mitch walks in on the Craig Kilborn character, basically making out, flirting, whatever you want to call it, with a server at a party. And then he's like, hey, you can't tell her, it's guy code, right? So he doesn't tell her. And then the Kilborn character is like, yeah, I saw Mitch harassing this girl. And then the Nicole character is like, oh yeah, I heard about you, Mitch. And he goes, no, that was Craig Kilborn. And then that's how they leave it. And then the next scene, you're like, you were right, Mitch. Craig Kilborn's a jerk, and there's no like revelation of how she finds out or anything. It's just like an afterthought, which all the women in this film are, right? But like, it's just like, you were right, so we built this whole subplot for no reason to take us nowhere to just go, yeah, that's okay.
Right. I agree with you that that's very poor. And I noticed that where she just shows up and she's like, oh yeah, it's all fine. I like you. But on the other hand, did you really want another scene with Craig Kilborn?
Yeah, I want more TV with Craig Kilborn. I want to know what he's doing right now. I liked him back in the Sports Center anchor days, and I like him when all he did was dance, dance, dance.
All right. Well, wow. one vote for Craig Kilborn there. So
he's not a good actor, but I did like him as a TV person.
All right. So Dave, I assume you saw this when it came out and enjoyed it.
Yeah, you got to remember this came out. I was 23 years old. This was the height of the Polar Bear MCs. We were drunk every single night, and this was our kind of thing. We loved this movie back then, but I'll also say I haven't seen it since back then. My real pick for the season is something we're going to talk about in our future cult classic episode later this season. But this, I was really excited to revisit it because, like I said, I haven't seen it since way back then, and I was really curious whether it would hold up for me.
And Dave, I am the same. I liked it back then, but I haven't seen it. So what does that say? Did we really like it that much, I wonder?
Yeah, it's a good question because you know what, just real quick, like to add to that, I was thinking about that, and I feel like I think I might be getting this out of order, but I think Wedding Crashers was like the next big one of like these guys, you know, and then whatever came after that, whatever they like replaced the previous one. It was like you never went back to the one before it, you know?
I mean, it's weird to me because obviously I didn't like this movie, but I feel like this kind of movie where it's just like, oh, it was so funny and I just had so much fun with it. It's the kind of movie that people who like it will watch over and over again. And as you guys pointed out, you enjoyed it, but neither of you ever bothered to watch it again.
Yeah, like, I mean, and it's not the same movie, but Anchorman, Step Brothers, other Will Ferrell movies, I'd be happy to watch again. This one I don't really want to watch again. And I think Wedding Crashers, I think, is probably a better movie too.
Dave, were you drunk when you saw the movie?
Most likely.
Dave, are
yeah.
you drunk when you go to the gangbangs?
Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay then. Any other background you want to offer on this movie, Jason?
Yeah, I want to say one thing.
Yes.
Todd Phillips was a successful documentarian before this, and he made a documentary called Fraternity House, I think, which won an award at Sundance and was supposed to be released on HBO, but like the guys in the fraternity house were like, yeah, we never gave you our rights to dramatize our life, so no one's ever seen it. And then someone was like, hey, that's funny, you should make a movie about adults in a fraternity house. And then his buddy wrote it, and then Todd Phillips and Scott Armstrong rewrote it like a bunch of times, and that's how this movie came to be. So that's kind of an interesting background on it.
And it's weird because, as you say, no one really has seen that Frat House. And I don't know if that's a lot of times there's movies that are not officially released, but you can find them online. And I don't know if that's the case with that movie. But regardless, it seems like the thing about that movie was it was kind of an expose. That's why those fraternity brothers were trying to suppress it, because it showed all the terrible stuff that went on in a fraternity. And so it's funny to me that somebody who made that documentary then went on to make this like wacky comedy about how fun it is to be in a fraternity. It's weird.
No lessons learned.
We've all gone silent.
So on that note, then we'll come back in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on Old School. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2003, we're talking about our producer David Rosen's pick, Old School, and we kind of went into it a little. Dave was drunk when he saw this movie, so but why did you pick it? What do you like about this movie, Dave?
And when did you sober up?
Not too long after, but I mainly picked it so that we could revisit it, and also I wanted to see Josh squirm while talking about it for sure. But I was really curious whether or not it would hold up. Obviously a lot of the jokes in this movie and a lot of the scenarios in this movie are things we would not see anymore nowadays in movies. And so I thought that would be an interesting thing. And also I do think, as kind of dumb as this movie is, and I agree with a lot of the criticism you guys are talking about with, structurally, this is just a bad movie. It's just that it was really funny at the time. But I also think it's really influential. We talked about some of those movies that came after that had a lot of these same people, or Todd Phillips himself, or, a lot of the same sense of humor. This brand of humor, I think, kind of dominated from this point forward until, the Judd Apatow thing kind of took over from there.
But the Judd Apatow thing started before this, didn't it?
It did. But I mean, it really kicked off after, I think, the 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yeah, I feel like this was another cog in the wheel, but I don't think this is any more influential. And I think Anchorman might have been before this too. I'd have to look that up. But I feel like, this is like, we call it it was called the Frat Pack, right? Which is a play on the Rat Pack. And it's, Apatow, Phillips, and Adam McKay were the directors. And you have Ben Stiller, the Wilson brothers, Will Ferrell, Steve Carell, Jack Black, Vince Vaughn, and then John C. Reilly, David Koechner, Leslie Mann, and Paul Rudd is kind of any combination of those, and you're getting a Frat Pack comedy movie that's raunchy and R-rated and kind of very adult in its nature, which is also, in a way, kind of like the teen sex comedies all grown up of the 80s, right?
Yeah, and Anchorman was the next year, by the way, and then 40-Year-Old Virgin was the year after that. So this was a little before.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all kind of intertwined. And a lot of the people, as you know, you're naming those people, Jason, like a lot of them work together in these different combinations with Apatow or with Todd Phillips. But I think one thing, that Apatow brings in is what we were just talking about that this movie doesn't do, which is the emotional depth, which is, it has all this raunchy humor and it's wacky and kind of over the top at times, but there actually is more to the characters. There's an emotional arc that you can actually care about. That's not just perfunctory because some studio head said to put in a love story or something like that, that Apatow really invests himself in the characters as a filmmaker. And so you can do that as a viewer as well. And that's something that Todd Phillips clearly does not care about. And I mean, is not, I feel like, again, it's not something that he fails at. It's something he doesn't even try to do.
Definitely.
In this film, I think in other films he does, the Hangover, there's some arc to some of the characters.
A little bit.
Yeah, well, okay, let me say this. In a recent episode, I talked about how frustrating it is to get notes from, producers or studios. And like, I was like talking about how in American Splendor, it's like, imagine if the note was more conflict. And in this one, the note should have been more conflict, more character development, put a structure on this thing. Because there was this thing I read where Ivan Reitman's the producer and Todd Phillips and Scott Armstrong, they were the writers, and they went to Ivan Reitman's house every day for 2 months to write. And they're like, it was like writer's boot camp. And I'm like, did you fail out of it? Because what happened here? Like, how is this the structure that happened after 2 months of writing, of rewriting? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, and there is conflict, but again, it kind of all gets crammed into the end of the movie, really. The idea of, I mean, we see Jeremy Piven's character come in fairly early on, and that he's against them. He's the dean of the college, and they used to they knew him when they were in college or when they were like in high school or something?
Yeah, jeez.
Right. And really, like, that's the other thing. Like, he's obviously a dick as the movie goes on, but in that first scene when he comes in, I was like, I'm on his side. He's grown up and he's confronting these guys who used to bully him when he was younger. And they clearly have not matured at all and are still being dicks to him.
Well, Vince Vaughn has a business and a family and kids. So, I mean,
and yet has not matured at all.
I want to say this, because we're talking negatively. The first 10 minutes I really laughed at. I really thought and I was excited because what he does that's really good is he takes known tropes of comedies and then he subverts the expectations, right? Like, so Luke Wilson leaves a conference early to go home, and then, you hear the moaning and groaning coming from his bedroom, and you're like, oh, okay, his girlfriend's cheating on him. And then he walks in and, oh, no, he's not being cheated on. She's just watching porn, right? And then, no, he is being cheated on, but it's not by a man, it's by a couple. And now she's into gangbangs. And like, I thought that was a funny take. And I love the wedding where not much happens. And Vince Vaughn is just, don't marry her. You're going to ruin your life. And Will Ferrell's just like, what? This is supposed to be the best day of my life. And then you get the Dan Band, who's classic with the Dan Band's funny, Josh, especially the first time I heard it, Total Eclipse of the Heart with all the cursing. And I think that was through Mitchapalooza, I was with this movie. And then afterwards, it just kind of just fell apart, like after Act 1. And I mean, I'll even go so far as to say like, oh, hey, we can stay on campus. We're a fraternity. And then the way they pick up. See, this is another example. No, I don't want to do a fraternity. And then Frank says, do it to Mitch. And then the next scene, they're doing it. Like, there's no revelation. There's no like turn of the key. There's no like, well, I have to do this. It's just like, okay, I'll do it, And so getting the recruits and, putting them through some of the hazing, which, would not be appropriate today. Some of that was funny, the tying the cinder block to your ding dong and to your penis and then letting it, fall, and the one dude falls through the sewer hole and he goes all the way, he falls down. That was pretty funny. Weensy. Or Weensy.
Thanks for clarifying what a ding dong is, by the way.
It's a dick.
We can use these words, right? We can use them all. Yeah.
Yeah. A schmuck.
A schmuck? Is that okay. Anyway, I don't agree with
Love Rocket.
any of that except the idea of the structure being messed up.
Weeder.
And
sorry.
No. I did notice that moment that you're talking about where, we've set up the idea that Luke Wilson he's trying to move on with his life, Mitch. He's broken up with his girlfriend. He's trying to start a new chapter. He's trying to mature maybe in a way. And Vince Vaughn, Beanie, I think is the character they call him, is his nickname.
Yeah.
Bernard, Beanie. Yeah. He's married with the kids and he clearly wants to live vicariously through his friend. And so he says, start the fraternity. And that could be like a conflict between them as friends. But as you say, Mitch is like, no way. And then it's like, okay. And well, why did we even bother to have that argument in the first place? Just have him agree right away.
And that is, again, with the subplot with Nicole. It's the same thing. Like, okay. Well, we just worked it out by saying it got worked out.
Right. And like, that's fine, especially with the fraternity thing, because it's like, obviously that's what the movie's about. And we need to get there so we can have the wacky fraternity stuff happen. So just get there, just do it. But yeah, I didn't find any of that early stuff funny. And to me, the other problem is not only did I not find that stuff funny, but I feel like all of that early setup makes me just hate all of these guys and think they're all assholes. And I don't like them or root for them. And especially Beanie. Beanie is the worst of them all. I mean, at least Mitch is been kind of wronged by his girlfriend, although the way they present it is very I don't know. It borders on misogyny, I think. And Frank.
Well, wait a second. I want to jump on that. That's not really fair. I mean, it's one thing if she's into what she's into, that's fine. But like, if she was cheating on him with one person, you would be like, okay, she was wrong in this relationship for going behind his back and doing this. So if she's into this and not telling him, then that's the same thing, isn't it?
Well, right. I mean, she's definitely cheated on him and he's been wronged, but I think the way that it's presented, especially, it makes her into this. I mean, maybe not misogyny, but I think it's what you're saying about the female characters is they're also one-dimensional. We can't see her as like a person who has wronged him, and there's no sense of their relationship being meaningful, because when she talks about like, oh, I was telling you about this stuff when I was talking dirty, and there's no dimension to her or to their relationship, which is sort of the inciting incident for the entire movie, right? He cared so much about being with her that he's become a wreck and he needs to now start a fraternity to bring his life back. And I just didn't buy into that. And the same thing with Frank, he gets married to this woman and then who he proposed to, presumably they've been together for some amount of time. And then their relationship falls apart in like 2 seconds. And you don't get the sense that any of these people care about the women in their lives at all.
That is true. I didn't mind that Frank's relationship fell apart though, because I think the standard thing is for him to be like, hey, I learned a lot and now I'm going to grow up and win my wife back. And instead he does the complete opposite. He learns nothing and takes over the fraternity, so that I didn't mind. I do agree with you on the Luke Wilson part. And it should have been him coming to a revelation of like, hey, my last relationship didn't work out. And no matter what she did, I was dead inside and this makes me feel alive. And this is why I'm starting the fraternity, because it solves a problem, but also it makes me feel like myself again or who I want to be. Right. So that was a problem. I don't agree with you. I like the Vince Vaughn characters that are acerbic, aggressive, abrasive. And I love the little like lines he throws out, that are clearly improvised that he just does when he does. I mean, the earmuffs thing is all improvised and everything. So I like Vince Vaughn in this type of thing. I think he's better with Jon Favreau when he has a partner who kind of knows how to utilize him at his best. But, I didn't mind him as much. I mean, I didn't mind him at all. You did. So,
yeah, I mean, and I think maybe we talked about this when we did our episode on Swingers, is that I just find his presence unpleasant, I think. And I like him when he plays characters who are villainous. Like in this movie, he's an asshole, but we're meant to like him. And I feel like sometimes, maybe more so in serious movies rather than in comedies, he'll play a character who's actually like the bad guy. And then I can get into his performance because I meant to dislike him. I will say, however, that I think the only time I laughed in this entire movie when I was watching it this time was with one of his lines, which may have been improvised. And when he says something like to Luke Wilson's character, something like, I built Speaker City from the ground up and I can barely even read. And when he's dismissing the value of college. And I found that funny because that was just this very like nihilistic kind of line. But overall, I found his character very unpleasant. And I think going back to something that you were saying about the arc for the Luke Wilson character is another one of these stupid structural things where, so the climax of the movie is they go through this whole long process to beat the system and to retain their accreditation. And they disgrace Jeremy Piven's character, the dean, and they, get him kicked out and everything. And they've triumphed and the fraternity can still exist. And then Nicole shows up and she's like, oh, you're leaving the fraternity? And he's just like, oh yeah, they don't need me anymore. Like, what did you just spend the whole last 20 minutes of the movie doing?
Well, to go along with that, then the last scene we see, they move into Dean Pritchard's house, right? And Frank is the new godfather of the fraternity. And he's yelling at Walsh and Artie Lang's character. And he's like, go get me a beer. And they're like, no, seriously. And then, he goes crazy. Get me a beer, blah, 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 right? And he leaves. And then he goes off screen. And the last shot of the movie is Artie Lang looking at Frank and Walsh going like, what just happened? Like, why do I care about Artie Lang at this point? Who's had like 3 lines in the whole movie, and is not an important character at all. Like, there's no reason for me to care about that, which was, I thought, just a very strange way to end in the film. So you didn't like anything? Well, Dave, what did you like?
Okay. I still think a lot of the humor holds up. I agree with almost every filmmaking and structural issue that you guys have with the film, but a lot of these lines, especially Vince Vaughn, who I know Josh hates, but I found almost all of his like little off the cuff remarks to be really funny. A lot of the setups, a lot of Will Ferrell stuff. I think I'm definitely more of an Anchorman guy when it comes to Will Ferrell, comedies, but I think that this is up there as one of the better ones that he's done. I think there's just a lot of really funny stuff that really holds up.
But you didn't give any specific examples.
Oh, well, I said the off the cuff remarks from Vince Vaughn. I mean, we already mentioned a couple of them, but Will Ferrell, once he starts drinking and, when it's so good once it hits your lips and you're my boy blue and all that kind of stuff. Another thing I love, Josh, I saw your Letterboxd review, so I know you didn't like this part, but is the use of Metallica during the whole scene where they're getting all the new Rushes. They're basically kidnapping the new Rushes in a van and just driving that van all over the place, crashing into shit. And it's so over the top and ridiculous.
Why didn't you like that, Josh?
Well, my point that I was saying on Letterboxd was, I mean, I don't like it because I didn't really like anything about this movie, but it wasn't the use of Metallica that I didn't like. It was just sort of, my comment was, and we talked about this in our episode on Paradise Lost, that at that time, getting Metallica to license a song to a movie was like they would not do it. And it took that movie that was a documentary about this huge injustice that was done against these teenagers who were themselves these big Metallica fans. And the filmmakers had to like go to Metallica and make their case for why the music should be in there. And it was such a huge deal. So my criticism is really more about Metallica sort of selling out. And that somewhere in the time period between then and this, they're just like, oh, dumb frat comedy? Sure, have Master of Puppets. Why not? Pay us money.
Screw it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Josh, tell us your thoughts on Blue's birthday party.
Where they do the lube wrestling or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, it's no worse than any other parts. I mean, it's obviously put together because they decided they need some female nudity in the movie. You got to have some topless ladies in a movie like this.
Which is on loop on the DVD menu.
That's what I was going to say. I borrowed the DVD from Dave, the unrated version, and the background of the main menu is just the two women taking their tops off. So they're going all in on it.
They got their money's worth.
Yeah, I mean, they know their audience. So what is in, I think I just watched the regular version. So what is in the unrated version that's added? More boobs?
I don't
I'm not
think
even
there are
sure,
any
to be
boobs.
honest with
Maybe
you.
maybe some of the blowjob workshop scene might be a little more explicit. Who knows?
Oh yeah, Andy
So,
Dick. That
Ugh,
was great.
Andy Dick.
I think Andy Dick is another thing when used right is very funny. I think here they just let him go far and away too just out there. I didn't really love that either.
Yeah,
So.
he's very. I think you're right. Maybe he can be funny when used right, but I think you can't give him any leeway at all.
I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, I wish Will Ferrell had more. But I thought he was funny on this one, very funny, and I like Will Ferrell obviously. And then I like Vince Vaughn. I like, so those are things that I liked. But yeah, they have some good comedic actresses who don't get anything in, right?
Yeah, these female characters are all just existing to kind of move the plot along or to check a box office. Again, the screenwriting, like, well, you got to have a love interest. You got to have this arc, because Luke Wilson's character is really the only one who has any kind of arc. Where he, by the end of the movie, is going to get with Nicole or whatever and have what appears to be a more mature relationship, I guess. Or really, to me, it just seems like it would be a more boring relationship because she's an extremely boring character. But
she has a white snake jacket, Josh.
She does, and I think at the end of the movie, and that is, you said the last shot, but there are some bits during the credits, and I think isn't one of the credits bits where Frank the Tank is in the grocery store and he meets Juliette Lewis, her character, the Luke Wilson's ex, and she invites him over for what is clearly a gangbang. And he's wearing a Whitesnake shirt. So something about Whitesnake really appeals to these filmmakers.
Yeah, the other one, and he might have been listening to Whitesnake at that point in time, was Kilborn's character driving his sports car, and he swerves to, avoid an oncoming car or something, and then he drives off a bridge and lands right on Dean Pritchett. And that was interesting that they gave him the money to do that just in the credits for seemingly no reason at all.
And then we have to do like these two characters who we didn't like, who were kind of assholes. Let's kill them during the credits, just in case we didn't give them the comeuppance enough.
Not just that. How about the lazy way that Dean Pritchett is exposed, So Pritchard.
Right, where he's recorded by the student council president, another female character who just is a plot device, who he's been blackmailing, or not even blackmailing. He's bribing her. He's offering her like help in getting admitted to law school so that she'll revoke the charter of the fraternity, and she records him reneging on his bribe or whatever. So yeah, it's all. And again, it starts out with him as a character where he has this kind of legitimate grievance, right? He was mistreated by these guys and they're still being jerks to him. And so he dislikes them and they're taking advantage of the system at the school. But then as it goes on, he's just like, no, I'm evil. And that's where it ends up.
Yes, he's extremely one-dimensional. That is true.
He is. Although it is kind of amusing. Of course, Jeremy Piven, I think before this, was in PCU, right?
Right.
As the opposite character, as the fraternity guy who is being harassed by the administration and needs to save his fraternity. So he's really covered the whole gamut of this very specific subgenre.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else you want to bring up here? Anything else you liked or didn't like?
I would just throw out, along with the Metallica, obviously that Sound of Silence moment. The Dan Band, whether you like it or not, there's some really great uses of music in this movie. I think.
Dust in the Wind, when Will Ferrell sings Dust in the Wind at
that too, yep.
Funeral.
Yeah. Yep. The Dan Band, though,
No, they were funny. Maybe now you don't like it, that's okay. But like when I first heard it, I was like, what is, like, the first time I had ever heard it, I thought it was really funny.
Exactly.
We added swear words to songs that don't have swear words in them.
Yeah, but not for no reason. It's to emote, Josh.
Yes, it's emoting.
Sure. Well, we're here in Las Vegas. I feel like, obviously not now, but in pre-pandemic times, I feel like the Dan Band performed here like every other week.
Yeah. How about Rob Corddry as a pledge who has 0 lines in the movie? How about that? As Robert
That was
Corddry.
weird.
Yeah, there's
really
all
weird.
sorts of like future stars in this movie with very, very small parts. Not as much as Corddry having no lines, but like Simon Helberg from the Big Bang Theory is another one of the pledges, and Sean William Scott showing up for like one scene as the guy who brought the horses to the kid's birthday party and stuff like that.
But Sean William Scott was already a star, and that's very Frat Pack comedy thing where they just kind of bring in a star as a rocket booster, just to get one good comedic scene out of it. And I liked, and I mean, I guess he was in Road Trip. I didn't see it, right? But I kind of like Sean William Scott in this, and I think I still think he's funny.
He can be. I think he can be funny in the right context. But you're right. I guess he was a bit more well known. The other one who's a pledge that I don't think also has maybe any lines is Patrick J. Adams, who went on to be the star of Suits.
Okay, I'm going to take your word on that one. So.
Suits, which ran for like 1 million seasons on USA and co-starred Meghan Markle. So, Do
you have a favorite episode of Suits?
The first episode, which is the only one I've ever seen.
Tell us about it, Josh.
It convinced me that I didn't want to watch any more episodes. But it was.
Hey, what do they wear?
Weirdly, they wear suits. It was a very popular show, and he was the main guy in it. That's my point. So,
Dave, you ever wear a suit to a gangbang?
Once.
Wow, that's the right answer.
Formal.
Yeah,
it was a formal.
So let's just rate this. You want to rate this out of 5 gangbangs? Since you seem to be fixated on those.
Sure. I'm going to go, and I've never done this before, Josh. Because I'm trying to think. I kind of want to say 2.75 gangbangs,
Okay.
Like it's between 2 and 3, but because it's a gangbang, I feel like I can add an extra decimal in there, so I'm going to say 2.75 gangbangs.
All right. I'm going to give it just the 2 gangbangs out of 5, which is the same rating I think I gave it back in 2003. And I mean, I'm down. I don't hate this. It's easy to watch, but it's not, I didn't find it enjoyable. So Dave, what's your rating on this?
I think I was a little over enthusiastic on Letterboxd. I gave it 4 there. I'm going to dial it back to 3.5 for me.
That's still very.
I enjoyed it. What could I say?
All right. Well, hey, it's your pick. It'd be weird if you didn't enjoy it.
That's right.
You're a wild man.
Yeah. We'll come back in a moment then and talk about the legacy of Old School. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2003, we have been talking about Dave's pick, our producer, David Rosen. His pick is Old School. And as Dave pointed out, whether we like this movie or not, it was pretty influential. It was part of this larger trend of these raunchy comedies with a lot of these same actors, these Frat Pack group that were very popular in the 2000s and continue to kind of come around. I mean, especially Will Ferrell, who's the one of these stars who has maintained the biggest level of fame. He varies, but absolutely Will Ferrell still stars in vulgar lowbrow comedies like this.
Yeah, the biggest of the Frat Pack would be Paul Rudd, who shows, he can do pretty much anything, but that's okay. Yeah, Will Ferrell has had a hugely successful career as a producer in television, in film, Funny or Die. And he's a good actor, and we know he's a good actor. So it'll be interesting to see what's next from him. I'm sure he'll show up on the Smokey and the Bandit TV show that McBride and his team are doing. And I'm actually very excited about a project I saw that he's doing on IMDb, The Shrink Next Door, which was a very good podcast. He is co-starring with Paul Rudd, and he is playing the patient who kind of is manipulated by the psychiatrist played by Paul Rudd. So that should be great because it was a very good podcast.
That sounds great.
And I didn't listen to the podcast, but it's a true story and it's a dark kind of story. So I imagine that's going to have kind of the black comedy tone, which I think will be interesting to see from those two guys. I think that could be fun.
And Rudd is always playing such a likable guy. It'll be nice to see him play a bastard.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't Eurovision nominated for an Oscar with Best Song?
That it is. I mean, I don't think Will Ferrell is as part of that nomination.
Know if he wrote it.
But I did not like that movie, Eurovision Song Contest. That's the recent Netflix original. But it has it certainly has its fans. And I feel like people who like that movie just love it. And the song is well written, you know, again, not by Will Ferrell, but he's the architect of that project, I think. So
and it's no Ya Dingo.
Yeah, ding dong. The word that you like to use earlier, and you got that wrong.
Well, you know, Josh, how many different things can it mean? Penis, and it's a cup, it's a hostess cake of sorts, and you know, it means idiot, and now it's a part of a song. It's too much. The director of Eurovision was the director of The Wedding Crashers, so that kind of Frat Pack through line is there. I thought it was all right. Eurovision's all right, but yeah, Will Ferrell, good. Vince Vaughn, I think at this point, like, you think he's kind of fallen off. He does a ton of movies every year, and like some cool stuff, you know, like as you know, I'm a big fan of Brawl on Cell Block 99. You know,
right?
That's a really fun one, and I know he does a lot with that guy. But he had 4 movies out in 2020, and he's very good as Fred Funkhauser on Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he gets to improvise, but it's within, you know, kind of structure and everything.
Yeah, and like I said, I like him, especially when he plays characters who are actually like irredeemable. And one of his 2020 movies was a movie that I think Dave liked called Arkansas, directed by Clark Duke, where he plays kind of a villain character. And that movie to me was a bit uneven, but I liked him in it. I felt like he did a good job in that world, that crime world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great when he gets a chance to do something good, because like you said, he's in so much that it doesn't have a really great connect rate, but you know, the good ones are great.
And he's one of those actors too that I think is probably like willing to do whatever, that if you have a low budget comedy and you need one scene with a famous person, that Vince Vaughn will show up and just do it.
And I want to give Vince Vaughn credit, because if you look at his filmography, you think of this, you think of Wedding Crashers, you think of Swingers, but he definitely, especially in like the late 90s, early 2000s, was doing some weird, you know, stuff, whether it was, I did not like the Psycho remake, but it was a chance he took. How about Clay Pigeons? You know, he was doing some interesting movies along those at that time.
Yeah, and I think it's better, you know, if he takes those chances. That's where I will enjoy him more, rather than just like, hey, funny Vince Vaughn showed up and said something funny. And
watch The Breakup.
So,
we
keep saying that. I should watch it again, as I said in the Down with Love episode, because I feel like I just missed what people loved about that movie. We talked about Luke Wilson when we talked about Bottle Rocket in our 96 season. And again, he works steadily, but he was the kind of guy that around this time we thought was going to be this massive star, and he just didn't get to that point. And his brother is a far bigger star.
But he was a leading man in these rom-coms, and he did some of these other movies. Like, I mean, and you know, like even like Legally Blonde and stuff, right? Like, I think what we're forgetting is like, there's just a shelf life to comedy, and especially this type of comedy, how long you can star in this. Because it would be weird to see them do it today, right? Like, you know, what if they were starting a fraternity today? That would be even, I don't think that would work at all, right? So, but he works, you know, like you said, all the time. He's on Stargirl. He's narrated Emergency Call. He's doing a lot of TV now. He's in a movie called 12 Mighty Orphans. That's an adaptation that looks like it could be a thing. I just think, you know, they can't sustain that level forever. So moving on to doing other things, whether it's producing or television, that's kind of, you know, the smart way to go.
I mean, you're right. But at the same time, I feel like Will Ferrell, like I said, he still does do these kinds of movies, and they're popular. I mean, Eurovision is not the same as this, but it has a lot of those similar sensibilities. It's silly. It's over the top. He's playing this ridiculous, buffoonish character. Like, it's very much in the vein of these movies. So I feel
what was the last big Will Ferrell comedy hit, Josh?
I mean, that, as far as Netflix goes, I mean, it's hard for us to say, but I feel like you can call that movie a hit. You can call Eurovision a hit.
I think Will Ferrell is the exception, though, because I think people just love to see him especially be stupid. And the older he gets, the stupider he's going to be on screen, you know?
Right.
And I disagree. I think he's going to move towards more mature parts, because we know he can do it. Stranger Than Fiction.
Hope so.
Everything Must Go. That was a good movie. Where he's selling all of his belongings. Like, he's got chops, man.
He does. And I'm not saying that he doesn't. I'm just saying that he can still, like, he can still do these kinds of movies. He proves that you can sustain that and still have an audience for it and still succeed with it. And he's good at it. I would say that even if I don't always like this stuff, he's better at that than Luke Wilson is, than Vince Vaughn is, than a lot of people are, and that's why he's managed to have this long career doing these wacky comedies, and it can still do it in his, mid 50s or however old he is now.
But again, like, I'm looking at the filmography and it's like Daddy's Home 2, where he's playing a straight man, or The House, which didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Like Zoolander 2, that's based on a property that's already, and it didn't really, kind of move the needle. So, I'm looking and I don't know, was Get Hard a big hit? I don't know that. Like, it's like the Lego movie was the last huge hit, but that was voice acting. So I don't know, man. I think Anchorman 2 was 2013. I think we're kind of overestimating that he's doing this type of stuff still.
I mean, again,
or that it's a big hit still.
Eurovision was last year, and I think does qualify. So maybe
but it's
not
an exception, because it wasn't. I don't even think that would have gotten a release theatrically. So they went, I want to do something wild, and it goes right to a streamer.
Well, but that's how you have success nowadays. I mean, I don't think you can say that that's an indicator of that movie not being successful.
No, I agree. But I'm saying he's not doing all these the way he was. Like Adam Sandler, what he's doing on Netflix is making a lot of those kind of Adam Sandler comedies. Will Ferrell is not doing that.
Yeah, he's certainly got more range. But I think in a weird way, Adam Sandler doing what he does also proves that I may not like Adam Sandler, but clearly he is good at what he does and people like it, that you can sustain that for a long period of time if you have the audience.
Well, I will agree with you that there's definitely an audience that wants this type of broad, wacky comedy that kind of fell out of favor, in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
That's a question I was going to actually ask you guys. We're talking about all the actors and all that, but what about college comedies as something that is continued on? I mean, obviously, last year we had Shithouse, which is a totally different kind of movie. But do you think that this kind of genre has kind of gone away?
Well, I think that there's so many, you couldn't do this movie now, obviously,
Sure.
as we said, and college campuses are this like focal point for a lot of this culture war stuff that I think makes it difficult to do that, and easier to do something like Shithouse, or another movie from last year that I like that I don't think you guys liked so much, called I Used to Go Here. But both of those movies, whether you like them or not, are these small scale character driven stories. It's not about college culture per se. It's just about particular characters and how they connect with each other. And they're comedies, but they're not broad, wacky comedies. And I think that's the kind of thing you can do with college now.
I think Shithouse showed a good amount of the culture at that school. But you're right. Those are indie movies. If you were going to do a broad comedy, you'd probably have to do it from that point of taking off of like you would call it Safe Space or something like that. And it's, the kids who are, very, woke versus the kids who are very anything goes, right? So, and also you'd have to make it all college kids. You couldn't do this, like you were saying, Josh, adult and college-y mix anymore. I don't think that would work at all. So, but look, we've been through this. We know all these movies, when we went through 84 and Revenge of the Nerds and stuff we talked about, they're all going to find problematic elements, but I hope there's an audience for, and there are ways to make all types of comedies, college comedies, raunchy comedies, which I think could use a nice little comeback right now. Anything, you don't want the same type of anything over and over again. I mean, yeah. Josh does it in his diet because he's a very bad eater, but like movie wise, you don't want to see the same type of comedy constantly.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That very relevant point. I will say that I expected, not having seen this movie since 2003 and not remembering that much about it, I expected to find it a lot more problematic than I actually did. And to me, the big issue was it was not funny, and it was poorly structured. And I mean, there were a lot of issues with it, but I felt like certain things that I was thinking, oh, this is going to be really like cringy. And it was not nearly as much as I thought it would be. So for whatever that's worth.
So they did almost do a sequel called Old School Dose, where they were going to spring break, which is a natural move. And funny little personal story, Josh, when I was up for writing Hot Tub Time Machine 2, What I did was I thought it would be fun. Let's do a summer camp version, same setting, and we'll just set it in summer camp in the 80s. And the one we lost to was the same kind of hot tub time machine where they go back, but instead they go back to the 90s in spring break, which is a fair way to lose. And then, neither of them got made anyway. So because Steve Pink came back on. But the old school dose was going to be that type of thing where, we have to go and find a new kingpin. And then Will Ferrell and I think Vince Vaughn just thought like, hey, we're just repeating ourselves. So let's not do this.
Yeah, I think that was the smart move. And of course, Revenge of the Nerds 2 does exactly that. The nerds go on spring break and, have to say, so that's really, I think Vince Vaughn and Will Ferrell were right to reject that, but it's also just a lazy pitch. They could have come up with a better idea, I think.
All right, here's my last question. Do we see Todd Phillips going back to comedies after Joker?
I don't think so, because I think if Joker had failed, Joker was this huge swing for Todd Phillips going from these raunchy comedies to doing something so dark and so serious. And I think if Joker had flopped, he definitely would have gone back. But Joker was such a huge success that in a weird way, he can't go back, because now people think of him as the guy who made Joker, and his next movie has to be something dark and serious. So he's had quite a weird career trajectory. And I had totally forgotten, because I was looking up his movies and I was thinking of him as the guy who just did like raunchy comedies and then Joker. But there's that step in between where he made that movie War Dogs with Jonah Hill, which is sort of a dark comedy, but takes on a lot of serious elements. And I remember thinking that movie was actually not bad and probably better than Joker.
Well, let me say this. I think we got to give Todd Phillips credit, because he's taken a lot of huge swings. He went from documentary to raunchy comedy, and then Old School wasn't a sure shot. At the time, Vince Vaughn was the biggest star, I'd say. And then The Hangover, he became super rich off of, because he bet on himself, because none of those guys were really famous at the time. And he said, that's fine, put up my salary and I'll just take a back end. Just let me make this movie. And it became the most successful comedy of all time, right? So he's taken a lot of swings. And like you said, Joker was another big swing. I know he is attached to the Hulk Hogan movie for Netflix, I think.
And that's something that will probably, have a more comedic element to it. I can see that movie being like I, Tonya or something like that, where it has dark comedy about all the crazy stuff that Hulk Hogan did, but certainly isn't going to be like Old School or anything like that. We'll see. Is Will Ferrell going to play Hulk Hogan?
Don't think so.
Weren't people saying Hemsworth?
Yeah, I think it's a Hemsworth brother.
Yeah, I like. Is it Chris Hemsworth or one of the lesser ones?
Liam's not really sure. A lesser one. He's a big one, isn't he? So
not as big
as the other one.
The lesser Hemsworth. Liam?
The Liam is he's fairly successful, but the one who's on Westworld, Luke Hemsworth is the one on Westworld. So yeah, he's the lowest of the three. But
maybe that's they all three auditioned, and it was like, Todd Phillips was like, let's see which one of you can say this the best. Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Thank you for that. Maybe it'll be like that
maybe Todd you should take the role.
The Todd Haynes biopic of Bob Dylan, where they'll just switch actors, but it'll just be all Hemsworths.
Or the Todd Haynes biopic of the Carpenters, and it'll just be Barbie dolls. So.
All of these sound way more interesting than I'm sure whatever Todd Phillips will actually come up with. Scott Armstrong is kind of, in a weird way, maybe the opposite, in that he was the co-writer here and he worked with Todd Phillips, but he has really stayed in that raunchy comedy space as opposed to sort of going beyond it, and has made some raunchy comedy stuff on his own as a writer and a director, and was the creator of the Andrew Dice Clay sitcom on Showtime, Dice, which I think was actually, a lot of that was shot here in Vegas, but I never watched it.
That could be good. Dice, has proven he can act. So I didn't watch it either.
All right. Good stuff. And lastly, Jason, what is your favorite post Old School Craig Kilborn project?
I wish there was something to talk about, man. I think he was early, way before Me Too, right? And I don't know if it was a Me Too situation or just him treating people badly, but that was the thing, right? He was an asshole, and they were like, hey, dude, you got to get off TV. And then he's like, I'll just be a producer. And then what is he doing now? Do we know?
I was looking, he has like very sporadic appearances. His Wikipedia has like, like a paragraph on his own that says like in 2016, he appeared in a macaroni and cheese commercial or something like that. So I guess he probably made enough money. He originated The Daily Show. I mean, he's not the creator of it, but he really pioneered that format. And he was, I feel like he's done so many of these things like The Daily Show or even like his Late Show where he was the host before Craig Ferguson and then James Corden, where he was kind of the guy who started it, but then he left and the people who took over after him are the ones who made it important or valuable.
Well, I want to give him some, and again, like, I don't know exactly what happened. I think it was probably a difficult to work with thing, but don't quote me on that. But The Daily Show, he was weird on that. And then the Late Show, he was very weird on that. And I kind of like that. And he was a great Sports Center anchor, Josh. So
maybe he should go back to that. I don't know.
Keith Olbermann's back. Why can't Craig come back? So
we'll see. Anything else you want to say on the legacy, Jason?
You're my boy, Josh.
Thank you. You can say that at my funeral. So that's Old School, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can follow us on social media.
You can. I'm at Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Instagram, J Harris Comedy on Twitter. And I am at goforjason.com, which is like an old, dilapidated frat house. It needs a good amount of fixing up. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
I'm going to say that my website is old school in that it's vintage. It's like cool and retro. It's
well, not more cool and retro than spacejam.com.
It's been numerous episodes since Jason mentioned spacejam.com. So thank you for that. JoshBellHatesEverything.com is my website. I'm also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to check out our Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group where we talk about movies all the time. And it's like a fun little frat house in there.
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's the wrong way to describe it. Jason, what do we have in our next episode?
Well, Josh, I'm going to turn it over to Dave because this is all about Dave. And I mean, dude, I'm excited for it too, but this you got to give this one to Dave. So
take it away, Dave.
It's our future cult classic, and it is a movie that could have also been my pick because it's like one of my favorite movies ever. It's Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
Yeah. So tune in next time for The Room, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.